Glass. The tremors were getting worse, not better like his doctor had promised. Grant tried using both hands, but that didn't work, and so all he could do now was hold his breath and laser in with insane focus. The colors swam a bit. He stopped breathing and dropped the glittering cube into place. It fit. Snug, perfect, cuddled into its tiny space and never to be jarred out. Sort of like how Grant could feel here in the studio on the best days. It was cold out there today, and he hadn't heard anything from Lenny yet, but then, wait, he'd left the phone unplugged. It was okay. Lenny's used to that. Grant knew he'd be by with groceries and the latest gossip. Time for the next trial by spatial alignment. He breathed, stretched a little, and bent back over to the tray to find the next perfect piece. One life, reduced to the importance of a colored bit of glass. Every yearning, each fall and each writing, each uttered word and every unspoken thought, each miserable season of failure and every brief, bright triumph, each reaching for the unreachable and every sign that all is not lost, every 4 a.m. panic attack and every afternoon nap, every delicious meal, each orgasm, intense and disappointing, every satisfying dump and the dreadful panic of a breath undrawable, all compressed in a flash into one irregular chunk of sand and metal oxide that glitters but keeps its secrets. Grant lives and moves like other men, but every so often he feels like he hits a barrier and has the overwhelming sense of being cuddled into the perfect space, never to be jarred out. Usually he settles back into his space, content to shine in his own modest way. He'd begun work on his last mosaic when this begins to change. If Grant is a chunk of colored glass, tucked into his assigned spot, Lenny is a wash of paint that can't be contained. He's swept against many chunks of glass and has altered the color of some. His fluid, restless ways have made some little pieces burrow more deeply into their spaces, and he's been known to unseat the less securely moored. "Hey, Svengali dude, you left your door unlocked, you know?" Lenny bumped the door shut with his hip and tossed the keys onto the counter. He didn't expect a response and didn't get one. This is just how it was when you kept company with these genius types. He moved around the kitchen, straightening and putting things away. Lenny had long ago made up his mind about life and the stuff he was prepared to accept to get by. One long ago 9-to-5 job gave him grinding, endless, inane hours to consider exactly what he was doing here. Dying. Slowly, incrementally, document by document, his life was being leached from him and he could feel it. He'd shove blindly through the morning until it was time for the 10:15 coffee break, and he'd flee the office to buy a muffin and toss crumbs to the sparrows, jealous of their freedom. He couldn't quit. It was a good job, after all, with benefits and good pay. It was the worst nightmare he could imagine, and only the decency of the gods got him fired and free. After this and that crap gig at mini-marts and copy shops, he'd moved downtown and begun drinking with the artists, the cranks, the conspiracy nuts, and the writers. In broad strokes, he swept through various doorways, and finding the open ones, rushed in to make himself indispensable. He fetched and dropped off. He could fix stuff. He could leave stuff alone. He could be trusted in the way of the best opaque acrylic paint to cover every bump in the panel and keep his friends' lives bright and uncomplicated. He was also very good in bed. He put the kettle on and peered into the studio at Grant's humped form. Poor bastard's hands shook so hard that Lenny couldn't imagine how he was getting any work done. Kindly, he slopped a little bourbon into the teacup and reached for the shortbreads Grant liked so much. He plucked down the apron by the sink, tied it around his waist, and got to work on the dishes while the kettle heated up. He still needed to pick up Matty Joe's latest mysterious delivery and run up to feed Mr. Xander's Jack Russells. "Ah, here you are," Grant sighed, wiping his hands on the front of his shirt. "Hey, Grant." Lenny poured and passed the cup. "Careful, let it cool a little. Hungry?" "Hunger? What's that?" Grant's laugh was gently musical, putting a pretty face on his fatalism. "You'll like these." Lenny pushed the plate of shortbreads over as Grant lowered himself into the kitchen chair. He moved slowly, but with slight small-bird jerks, and Lenny had long ago learned not to fill his cups to the brim. "So, who's about to make a good sale? Who's in bed with who?" Grant sipped his tea and winced a bit, then smiled. "Good tea, Lenny." Lenny smiled and poured one for himself. He liked Grant, so Grant got the full scoop, uptown and downtown. Others got carefully edited versions that fit what they already believed about their part of the forest. Grant unfolded and had some more tea, glad for the sun filling the kitchen and for the company. A real joy of Lenny's spill of news was the utter lack of judgment. Mattie Jo's failed gallery show merited nothing either in sympathy or malice. It was what it was. Delaria and Skip, embarking on a partnership in a new shop, were wished well without noting that their location was abysmal. Yes, they were off to a slow start, and what of it? Bickford was still up in detox, and everyone hoped he'd stick with the meetings this time, but no one was going to give him grief about it. Grant knew Lenny would be swinging by with the care package they'd assembled for him later. It's a fine mess of a world, isn't it, Len? Grant finished the last of the shortbreads. Bad days, good days. Lenny shrugged and filled Grant's cup with straight tea this time. Thanks for bringing my groceries, Len. You're a godsend, you are. Grant sincerely loved that Lenny never asked how the work was coming. Here. Lenny pocketed the money without counting it. I'll see you on Thursday, Grant. Let me know if you need anything before then, as I'll be over at Dickie Masters watching his cats all week. Poor Lenny. Good luck with that. They're only like that when he's around. When it's just me and them, all is calm and friendly. If you say so. Grant pulled himself up and shuffled over to the door to let Lenny out. Hear anything from Derek? Oh, oops. That was a bad move, and Grant could only blame the bourbon as he watched Lenny's face stiffen. I'm thinking he's crazy busy getting settled in. Lenny, liquid, pulled out away from anything that would leave Grant feeling bad, but he won't give more than he has to get out the door. The day began to harden once Lenny had gone. Grant puttered for a bit, but there was no escape, and he returned to the studio and his tray of bitter little bits of color. He'd sworn never to do another mosaic, but here he was, too far gone to get out, and resigned mostly now to how the process was going to drag him along an unmarked, unpaved, and unfriendly road through every new uncertainty and every lost opportunity. He hoped it would be worth it, but had his doubts. They all pretend they're a community, a tribe, with a shared history and regard for each other's well-being. It's a necessary deceit, and Lenny knows his role as the harmonizing color that is altered slightly at the doorway of each tribal pretender. He's always seen his ability to morph gently into the required shade of whatever color will best serve as an asset. But Derek saw this differently, and it never stopped being a point of friction between them. The sadness of it was that Derek never recognized how much he needed Lenny to lighten, darken, deepen, or brighten for them to see each next step of their complicated dance. Was it love? Not exactly. Passion and lust and curiosity and wonder, yes. A joy at finding a recognizable face in the mirror of each other's lives, a shared delight and shared repugnance in many of the same things. All this, and an ability to make each other laugh. But Lenny firmly believed it wasn't love until Derek took the job in L.A. And now, the steadily darkening of his palate could only be the spreading ichor of a broken heart. And that was a real pisser. Mattie Jo was Lenny's hair shirt that he wore with shifting shades of glancing blues and barred bastard black. In his rounds, he'd encountered every permutation of ego, but none towered like the great Mattie Jo's. He'd read the dismissive coverage of her new show over at the Gadasian and knew what he was in for. Fuck off, you little faggot. Her voice and her malignance filled the parlor without needing her actual presence to back it up. Kiss my tight, cute ass, woman. Lenny needed to feel taller when he walked through some doors, and he positively loomed, rounding the corner into Mattie's reading room. He'd joked once that she'd had the place decorated by Masterpiece Theater. The woman really took delusions of grandeur to exciting new places. I told you I don't need you today. She looked diminished somehow, an alarming sight. You don't know what you need. He worked to keep any kindness out of his voice. Here. He set the bottle of cognac on the dry bar and went for glasses. I'm not paying for that shit. You've already paid, and we both know it. He poured and handed her the glass. That was cutting it close, and he turned his back on her, giving her time to get her weapons redeployed. He had been reading about Mattie Jo Bishop since he was sneaking Art in America into his geography textbooks in high school. It was Grant who introduced Lenny to her on a day he swore he'd never wash again. Here! Her fury only seemed to steady her, and the extended hand held out an envelope without a tremor. He took it and knew the trouble he was in immediately. It was his own fault, thinking he could waltz into the den of this wounded lioness and not come out raked and bloody. The envelope was addressed to the one man the whole tribe courted and hated, Alexander Ulysses Castor. Layering watercolors of experience over the hastily scratched-out line drawing of the cliched, gay, teen coming-of-age story, Lenny had done much to dismantle an ancient structure of defeat. Lack of discernible talent or drive weighed against bone-deep desire and belief in luck. Luck will always win. Lenny quit high school, left home without so much as a note, and came here because he was willing to be lucky. Turning up his collar and stepping out into the bite of late autumn, he felt around in all his tucked-away places for extra luck, because he was going to need it. Mattie Jo was never one to dwell on what was. She'd sent her bullet and wasn't too concerned with whether the wound be flesh or mortal. Nor was she overly concerned with any collateral damage. As far as she could see, Lenny had accepted some responsibility by standing this close to the mouth of the cannon. She poured more cognac and went back to her studio. Clearly her magic ideas about combining mirrors and strung-out bits of colored wire and found fabric were too innovative to be appreciated by the current arbiters of art. Morons. As if she was going to alter a single idea to appeal to anyone. Mattie Jo gathered the stiffened pile of calf pelts that Lenny had lugged over. She had work to do. Approaching the storied address, Lenny squared himself. Under and behind and just barely visible through an easygoing acceptance of his place in this particular firmament was the beating, inexorable certainty of something great. Grant was blind and deaf to it, but Mattie Jo and some of the others smelled ambition when it brought their groceries and walked their dogs. It colored their experience of Lenny and his of them. There was no reason to approach Castor trembling. In fact, Lenny was discovering more reasons to see this as a God-sent opportunity with each step up to the imposing front door. He pressed the doorbell and heard nothing, but one push would do. He waited, willing every tension into a masquerade of ease, and then believed the lie. Just as the door swung open, the thought of picking up old Castor here as a client turned the trick, and he greeted the gray-clad housekeeper with a charming smile. "How do you do?" He held out Mattie Jo's calling card. She had turned away a generation of supplicants, but she recognized the card and stepped back to allow Lenny in. "I'll see if Mr. Castor is available." The envelope felt warm in Lenny's lapel pocket as he stepped in. She gestured, and he obeyed, settling comfortably into a small chair outside a ridiculously sumptuous sitting room. Yes, he was being put in his place by the help, and he didn't care. Briefly, he wondered about what was in the envelope and what kind of reaction he was going to face, but he was here now, so let's just savor the moment, shall we? He wasn't given much time to savor anything, as Gray Lady was back almost immediately to usher him into the presence. He rose and smoothed his jacket, sorry not to have had a chance to dress for the occasion, but this is how life handed you glittering prizes in dire disasters. Lenny's real talent resided in his unlearned ability to tap into just the right rush of color for every occasion. Today called for something a little subdued, but with a decided hint of the treachery of twined red, gray, and sparks of obsidian. "So the falling star has something to say to me." Castor didn't even bother turning to face Lenny. "How do you do, Mr. Castor?" Lenny made standing look as casual as easing back into the most comfortable of chairs, another of his little party tricks. "To be honest, I have no idea what Mattie Jo is sending." Now Castor turned, engaged the cut of Lenny's character. It took everything in Lenny's deep palate to maintain the flow. The gods only knew how many otherwise confident contenders had been stripped to the bones of their last refuge by that look. In the balance of a moment, something tipped it in Lenny's favor, and he was fully, exquisitely, painfully aware of how close he'd come to dismissal. Fluid and subtle, he held out the envelope. "Open it and read it to me." Castor smiled. Lenny, knowing an audition when he was in the middle of one, complied. This was not the time for too much thinking, and he read without taking in one bit of meaning. Each word was a new color falling off a new brush. It registered in his brain that this was breathtakingly abusive and dangerous shit coming out of his mouth, but nothing in his role of color and composition let on that he was aware of any effect it might be having. Indeed, it wasn't having any effect. Castor's expression was beige. "Thank you." Castor lit a cigarette and nodded toward the door. The audition was over, and as Lenny was shown out the grand front door by the housekeeper, he had no idea how he had done. He did know, however, that Mattie Jo had just tipped over one very large and far-reaching domino. You can take the most brilliant and pure colors and make them into a dismal mess unless you approach your work with forethought and discipline. Lenny let himself into Xander's small flat, carrying treats for Missy and Champ. He'd gone out about his business yesterday, not bothering to get back to Mattie Jo. She knew where to find him. He puttered about, watering the ferns and tossing goodies into the air for the dogs to catch. Xander kept it too cold in here, so Lenny went over and opened a valve on the radiator in the corner and saw the most curious interaction out the window. Lenny was far from the only player on the fringes of the tribe, and nothing about his place in this particular circuit was secure. Maxwell Westy would always be trouble, and there he was, chatting up Grant. To his credit, poor dear Grant seemed to be trying to get away, but old Max, he was all Velcro, and Lenny could only draw back a bit and watch. Grant was nodding and easing away, but Max touched his sleeve and leaned in closer. From his vantage point, Lenny couldn't make out Grant's face, but he saw his back stiffen. Then he was doing something Lenny had never seen him do. He was yelling. Grant, the poster boy for courtesy and gracious behavior, was ripping a very startled Maxwell a new one. Lenny quickly leashed the dogs and stepped out just in time to quite intentionally collide with Grant. "Oh, sorry, Grant." Lenny pulled the dogs around, glad to dance for Max's benefit. "Say, dude, are you all right?" Grant didn't say anything at first, but fixed Lenny with the strangest look. This wasn't good. "Lenny, I'm glad to run into you like this." He dropped his gaze in his voice. I won't be needing groceries this week, and yes, I need my keys back for the time being. I need them." "Sure, Grant, no problem." Ticking through every color in his files, Lenny made a strategic move. "But I don't have them on me now. When's good to bring them over?" This flustered poor Grant, and he stood there stuttering and miserable. Lenny, lately in some very cool company, chose to wait him out. This was not the time to be playing the sweet fool. "Is it true, then?" Grant bit into this new direction like he was eating glass. "You went to see Alexander Castor?" "Grant, this is not a conversation for the street corner. Why don't you come into Xander's for a cup of tea and a little chat?" Lenny's helpful hand on Grant's arm was much more than suggestive. Grant looked around himself with wonder. This was not how he'd envisioned his afternoon. And now what was he going to say? Nothing, that's what. Every so often, Grant needed firm footing, and right now he was reaching for it with all his might. This Lenny came across as the ever-helpful, always smooth-running, soothing runner of errands and bringer of small news. But after what he just heard from Max out there, well, this young man had some explaining to do. Grant waited for his tea and waited for his explanation. In the kitchen, Lenny now understood the shaft of fear his errand had engendered. He didn't need to be afraid of Castor, yet. But just being in the beast's proximity was enough to shake even Grant, Lenny's most trusting puppy. God only knew what was being whispered up and down many lanes right now. The mashup of colors and directions was getting pretty muddy here. Lenny put the kettle on and stood with both hands on the counter and his head down. Quiet. Don't think. Let something separate out from the mess. "Grant, I have to say I'm a little surprised at you, jumping at the first thing out of Westy's mouth. Milk?" "Tell me why you went to Castor's." Grant almost managed to be firm. Yeah, milk, please." "Tell me why it matters so much to you." Lenny poured equal parts milk and sweet whitewash into the cups and into the air between them. "You don't have any issue with the man, right?" "Was it Matty Joe?" Time to move with real care. It was entirely too easy to underestimate a quiet man with lovely manners. "How's the tea?" "Then it was Matty Joe." Grant shook his head. "That woman will be the death of us all. What did she have to say to Castor?" "You don't think she's that reckless, do you?" "I do. And I suppose it's entirely out of the realm of possibility that I chose to go over and see Castor on my own, for my own reasons. Lenny, dear young man, I'm not a complete fool. Even you don't go charging into minefields without a map." Lenny retreated and pondered the mess he was making in response to the mess he'd been handed. What would Derek do? He was always so good at cutting through crap and turning tables. "Grant, do you trust me or not?" "Trust you to do what?" "To see this through without me having to defend myself from a lot of malicious gossip. Will you be my firewall?" "Oh, dear. Oh, Lenny, you can't be as naive as all that." "Grant, all you need is go back to your work and shut anyone down when they come to you with this bullshit. I don't need you to say anything, misdirect, or lie, or embellish. Just shut them down by not engaging, not offering them anything." Grant had some tea and let Lenny think what he would. This would not end well. The boy had no idea the stakes of any game involving Castor. He sighed. There were several new deliveries of glass waiting at Dilson's, and he was not up to lugging 20-pound bags home. A shattering, fragmenting, was always part of the deal, and who was Grant to try and hold things together? I still think it was that madwoman, but it's on you, son. Deep pools of one color mean nothing, regardless of the depth. Lenny lay awake long into the night. His deft swirls of movement and motivation were being tested, but this was the most worthwhile use of his long underused abilities, and before the sun rose, he'd convinced himself he could conjure any sweeps of misdirection and seduction required. He rose, weary but set. Let's see, bags of glass over to Grant, and new canvases and wine up to Stanley. He hadn't heard from Philip in a while, and now was the time to shore up his defenses. He logged onto his email to start sending out the first string of communiques. 6 emails from Derek? The most recent one sent an hour ago, and the subject line was all in caps. I need you here. Columns, nice, clear delineations, logic and bedrock and truth, oh my. There was nothing so satisfying and so secure and relaxation-inducing as a perfectly balanced ledger sheet. Flights of pretty swirls of this and that fell twitching next to the solid, unshakable pillars of numbers that added up to a vast plateau of stability. Art was all very good in its place, and Derek supposed important in some airy-fairy, invent something ever so much more fun kind of way that too many emotionally immature types seemed to need. Lenny, for instance. And that was just too bad, because Lenny was such a peach otherwise. Derek liked L.A. and drove right into the deep end of every lush turquoise pool of opportunity. Privately, in the sanctity of his own company car, he admitted that he loathed the subway. Sitting in traffic with an audiobook and some numbers to reconcile was never a hardship. He practically purred every time he turned the engine over and pulled out of the parking garage. The excitement of starting over, setting up a new apartment with lovely new furniture, getting sorted out on a demanding job, had all kept Derek nicely distracted, and he was able to hold on to the promise he'd made to himself. Let Lenny come to him. The kid would see the light, Derek was sure of it. He couldn't make a go of it as a glorified errand boy for a bunch of whack job art types. But Lenny didn't call or email. When Derek did break down after a month and called, he got Lenny's voicemail. This started the current round of phone tag that was trying Derek's already diminished store of patience. He pulled off the exit ramp, adjusted his sun visor, and checked his phone again. Oh, Mother Mary in a bikini, this was one truly harrowing hangover, with parts of last night missing. Derek couldn't be sure what it was he'd ingested to result in this brutal pounding. Nothing from Lenny. Again, he decided to just move on. There were so many interesting men here. Why should he waste even a minute on Lenny? Clearly, Lenny wasn't wasting any juice on him. What was his name again? Chase. Yes, of course. Chase was so available tonight or any night. Tonight it would be then, and Lenny was welcome to his silly artistic dreams. Lenny went on about his business and pondered his response to those loopy emails. Bickford was out of detox and needing a little company. What was so damned appealing about that trumped-up bean counter anyway? Did Derek really think Lenny was just going to up and leave his life for some housefrau existence out in that endless summer nightmare? Did they really know so little about each other after nearly 2 years? All very depressing. Lenny's swoosh of color and light were all very nice, but Bickford had built a fine edifice of welded steel, iron, and copper that didn't need any embellishment, thank you very much. Oh, Christ, but it was going to be a bitch of a long day, and forget about tonight. One day at a time, indeed. He picked through the mail, paced, decided to throw it all to the gods and get a bottle, then decided to wait a bit. Lenny would be here soon. If nothing else, he would be a distraction, allowing Bick to ignore his brain for a bit. What could the mightiest steel do against the flood? Sit there, that's what. Wait it out. No flood lasts. Steel lasts forever. Even floods of lush, sweeping color can only mark the steel, and Bick stood steady through every storm. Or he had until recently. An email caught his eye, pulling him out of the spiral of self and giving him something to feel ever so superior to. Bick had always suspected there was a sly agenda sliding around in the background with innocent, helpful Lenny, and here was the evidence. Castor, no less. He had a bit of time and reached for the phone. 15 minutes later, Bickford gave up. He was the last to know, as usual. Nice to have picked up a few details, though, he thought as he chewed his thumbnail. Where the fuck was that ferry, anyway? He'd about made up his mind about a bottle when the buzzer buzzed. Fabulous. He shuffled over to let Lenny in, cranky and put upon, and glad for someone to inflict his unpleasantness upon. Hey, Bick, I brought some raw honey and bread. Lenny had gotten used to the new climate quickly and knew in a general way what was coming. How's it feel to be sucking the devil's cock, kid? Bickford prided himself on not having even a passing relationship with tact or subtlety. As soon as he'd chased Lenny out, he was going for that bottle. "Tough day, eh?" Lenny went on about his business. "Not as tough as yours are going to be, smart-ass." Lenny pulled out plates and smeared honey onto slabs of brown bread and chose carefully among his options. Henry Bickford had never been a font of human kindness, but now Lenny reminded himself that old Bick was hurting and let the shit fall to the floor unnoticed. He was not unaware of how infuriating this would be to Bickford, and decided he could enjoy that aspect too. "Poor little Lenny, you have no idea how deep into the sewage you are now." "Here, Bick." Lenny brought in a plate of bread and honey and set it on the makeshift coffee table. He'd put the kettle on and went back in to get the tea, tossing a pack of smokes down by the plate for Bick. "You get any leads on a place for the new piece?" All Lenny needed now was a suit of lights and a red cape, but he suddenly wasn't feeling very charitable and could enjoy a round in the arena with this bull-headed idiot. The room got very still. Bickford did not reach for the tea or the cigarettes. His new piece had as much blood as welded stainless steel in it and was squatting down in his studio, unwanted and irrelevant. Whispers of rank Richard Serra worship had been growing louder for years after a rocket's red glare start for the young cocky Bickford back in the 80s. Hell had entire caverns for 25-year-old has-beens of every stripe. Bick just refused to settle into his and had been grimly fighting to be a contending voice again for 3 brutal decades. It was about time for that bottle. "Thanks for the stuff, Len. I gotta go out." He reached out an unsteady hand. "I'll have my keys back, too." Lenny wasn't one to cave, but hitting the bitter wind outside, combined with the rising tide of recrimination and suspicion, was having its way with his usually level head. A garbage truck rumbled by, and the city suddenly felt filthy and limited. Some schmutz got into his eye, and he was blinking furiously, thinking furiously, and would have missed the painted footsteps in front of him if they hadn't also been depressed into the concrete. As it was, he stumbled, and would have likely fallen except for a helpful hand on his elbow. A remarkably strong hand that spread warm reassurance up through his arm and into his belly. He turned to thank his Samaritan, and was alone. The traffic crowded his sound space, creating more confusion. A tear streamed out of the afflicted eye, and he held it shut to allow the bit of dirt to be flooded out. So what was the deal with these footsteps, anyway? He saw that there was a key set into the heel of each footstep. Quick, he glanced around to gauge the reactions of his fellow pedestrians. A slender thing in ridiculous heels floated right over the sunken footprints. It wasn't that Lenny hadn't appreciated Derek's relationship with logic and certainty, but logic will only get you so far in this world, and certainty ended where this trail of footsteps began. Blinking through a gauzy veil of tears, Lenny didn't even try to figure out where the footsteps were going. A couple of curious dachshunds held their human hostage while they sniffed and investigated the red footprints, their human obliviously lost in his little handheld screen. Lenny wasn't surprised to find that his foot fit perfectly into the print in front of him. It also seemed to make sense that there was a point of heat in the heel where each key was set. And sound. There was a faint but very pleasing bell tone with each step. And this was how Lenny walked from here to there, curious, but not worried even as his feet sank more deeply into the sidewalk. Grant surveyed the new bags of glass. Crunched, separated, broken, and piled up in mismatched heaps of doubt and insomnia, the space between a half-finished slag of hope and the fizzed-out, jittery mess of potential was noisy with the chatter of every 4 a.m. session of despair. Grant sank down, cowed. The tea kettle screamed, and Grant rose to obey. He'd thought the new tiles would give him that boot he always needed, and always got about 3/4 of the way through a project when the dark forest was closing in and the breadcrumbs were all eaten. Tea steaming nearby, Grant began facing down the bits of chaos. He'd been doing this long enough. The opening, the spreading, the sorting, the sliding and scooping, and even the sounds were a form of prayer. It would be all right. Right? Something caught his eye, and he turned to the mosaic. "Grant, can you hear me?" Lenny's voice slid past Grant's ears and appeared in smooth washes of lavender and soot in his head. "Lenny?" He looked back and forth between the mosaic and the piles of glass. The voice seemed to emanate from both. "Mattie Jo is coming over. You have to tell her no, you won't do it." "Do what? Lenny, where are you? Are you all right?" "I guess so, but I don't know. No, maybe I'm not. Watch out for Bick, too, by the way. He's drinking again." By now Grant could see flutters and shades of something moving at the periphery of the mosaic. It wasn't Lenny's face exactly, or any face, but there was a sense of entity pushing against the limits of glass. Grant was moved by a great wave of compassion and tiny spikes of shame for his doubts about Lenny's intentions, and leaned in towards the mosaic with an outstretched hand. As his hand hovered closer and closer to the bumped surface, a repelling heat scolded him and the doorbell rang. Full, rising, fear-driven, and furious. The sparks of the welder's torch spit, bite, arc, and burn out. Nothing lasts. No truth distilled through the sieve of any artist's experience can be heard by every listening ear, and really most ears aren't listening. All who create scream at the gates of indifference, but some carry more than raised voices, and Mattie Jo was bringing her own specially designed battering ram to the war. Since she no longer gave a good goddamn who got rammed, Grant was quick to get out of the way as he let her in. "You're with me, or you're going down too." Mattie Jo never wasted time with the niceties. "Tea?" It was hard to remember when Grant lusted for this madwoman. "What? No!" Mattie swept in, tossed aside her coat, and took in the studio's meager spillage of Grant's aching need to make something magnificent. "This is what you're doing these days, eh?" "It's a different world, Mad." Grant shrugged and pulled the curtain to let his visitor know he wasn't interested in her opinion. "Not if we don't want it to be, it isn't." She flopped down on the worn settee. "How long are you going to be cowed by that prick Castor, anyway?" From the edges of the curtain, Grant saw a brief sparkle of light and figured Lenny was listening. Why did Grant have to be the one to face down this bullshit? He had no quarrel with Alexander Castor. It had been years since their last go-around. Castor had always been frank about the limits of what he could do for Grant, and Grant had worked within those limits with a fair amount of success. He'd picked up 3 good commissions through Castor and wasn't too put off when this or that piece was returned home, an unwanted stepchild of the art world. "Woman, you take the weather personally. Why the hell are you so determined to blame Castor for your failure?" Both Grant and Mattie Jo stared in amazement at the voice booming out from behind the curtain. Mattie was on her feet first, ripping the curtain back and standing, slack-jawed, at the sight of a smoothly massive mouth working through the bits of glass. "Sit down and listen." The emails sat, simmering and unresponded to, shifting from uppercase to lowercase in a frantic bid for attention. By now Lenny's legs, thighs, and coccyx were gone, securely shut away in immovable and stubborn solid green-black swirls of frozen expectations. He knew those emails were pulsing away somewhere just out of reach, but in front of him were 2 shocked faces that wavered, sliding in and out of focus. Something was at stake. What? What? An urgency sifted up through small hairline cracks in Lenny's peripheral vision. "Forget Castor." Lenny rather liked how his voice sounded, filtered through cracked layers of time, distance, and glass. It carried a new authority that was taking the formerly formidable Mattie Jo by surprise. Grant, on the other hand, was close to smiling. "You're the one, Mad. You're the one fucking up." Something was rising and turning. Lenny's initial impulse was to quell it, suppress it, shove it down and away. His sense of omnipotence was slipping, and he wanted to hang on to it, but the tide was going back out, and even the loose piles of glass were feeling it. A jittery romp was about to take over, and Lenny allowed himself a teetering moment of delight in the alarm blasting poor old Mattie Jo's eyeballs. Then it all exploded. Hungover again, Derek stumbled against the doorframe. That had been a very bad idea. Note to self, avoid porn stars. Chase had arrived with a bottle of Cristal and loads of attitude, but no condoms. The ensuing dance had been intoxicating and nauseating in equal measure. Poppers, more booze, something white and powdery, more poppers, and then, insanely enough, peppermint-flavored vodka. Twining up and down, over and under, that sliding snapper of a man gobbled up any shreds of common sense that might have tried to pull Derek back to himself. There had been a moment, though, a very long moment, when Derek thought he would pull free and be all right. He knew who he was here, and this was not him. He didn't bear back. He didn't snort anything. He was a sensible man. At some point, though, he caught sight of his phone, and there were those emails, lined up and ignored. That growling, it was him. His cock reared, rose, and all hope was lost. Then it all exploded. AleXander Castor poured another mineral water and considered the situation. He'd been running this show for a long time, long enough that what he really wanted was to be surprised. Mattie Jo's threadbare threats were old hat. There was a cauldron nearby, and she would be easily tipped into it, but he was in no hurry. Too bad Christine was gone. She'd be ideal for some nasty little sideshow which could draw this out a bit. But now Grant had gotten pulled in, and that was unfortunate. Alexander and Grant had history. There were so many storylines crossing here, but Grant's nubbly bit of aquamarine had resurfaced, studded with decades of mistakes and genuine talent. There was that brilliant altarpiece that still pulsed with joy, and for that Grant would always be spared the wrath of Alexander Castor. Castor was contemptuous of humans and their frail, stupid, selfish messiness. Art, however, real, heart-deep, throat-closing, head-spinning, word-killing, thought-imploding creations would always come first in Alexander Castor's cosmos. Wasn't it a shame they needed human hands, brains, and emotions to come into being? Lenny, now this was a nice twist that Castor could appreciate, but where had that slippery bit of work gotten to? There were places here that only Castor could access, or at least he thought he was the only one. Embedded in one long, unused narrative vault were lines of footsteps that could correspond to creative arcs, and somehow that smooth-talking dog walker was fiddling about in a very unstable area. Something was vibrating, and Castor sighed. Well, here was his surprise. It was good he'd sent Hilda home. He went into the library and closed the door, going over to run his hands over the spines of some very special books. Tilting his head slightly to catch the signal, he selected one and then put it back. Not here. Odd. He swung around to survey the room. Really? He backtracked over to a dusty corner. Nothing of interest had issued forth from these old paperbacks in over a decade. He hovered a steady hand above the line of shabby books and listened. Sex, of course. That scent was unmistakable and brought up some amusing twists of nostalgia, but nothing really stirring. Here. He pulled the book out and flipped it open to where the sent emails were now practically hysterical, flashing neon and HTML fireworks. Scowling, Castor was ready to toss the book into the fireplace. Who needed yet another soap opera? And then it all exploded. Every day, every hour, whole universes are exploding into whispers of ashes. What can another 2 or 3 more or less matter? Shattered and spun and wrung, 3 connected strands of consciousness rip apart with collateral damage up and down the spectrum. What happens when glass superheats and is shot into vast washes of undammed color that then tear down all the supporting pillars of mathematical logic? Who survives? Who maintains any structural integrity? Sentience and eyeballs and the soles of feet fly in every direction. Who remains who, and who melds into what? Self breaks down and slithers into tiny, sparkling shards that mingle with other. The certain becomes wet and unsustainable. Long-suppressed desires whip onto the backs of unbroken horses and tear apart every semblance of order. Caution is the first casualty, left ruined and useless. Compassion disintegrates. The solid temples that once parenthesized common sense and sensible action cave in, and what was formerly the good head on a set of shoulders goes distorted and degraded. It's a good day to disappear. And in 3 tiny pops, Lenny, Derek, and Alexander Castor disappear. Heavy drapes of confusion are slow to lift, and as they do, Mattie Jo, Grant, Bickford, 2 confused Jack Russells, and a hustler who calls himself Chase wonder where they are and why they're covered with shimmery, sharp dust. Grant rises and adjusts his glasses, going over to the window to see an unchanged street. He helps Mattie Jo to her feet. Neither speaks. Fundamental structures have been altered, but now is not the time to kick the tires. No mysterious voices issue forth from the glass. Outside, it's begun to snow tiny razors of weightless glass, and people flinch and hunch down. He walks Mattie to the door and watches her face and hands turn pink. He wipes his own face and gazes at the soft smear of blood. Time to get back to work. Grant takes another stab at the impossible, and after all, what else is there to be doing while he's sucking air? Another bit sparkles and makes promises, but he isn't the sucker he used to be, and there are negotiations. Squinting and peering up, the glass ponders its options. This used to be so much easier. Look how steady his hand has gotten, God damn it. There's a subtle twist to be made, and the bastard still gazes down with a small smile. Up and down the boulevard and into the alleys and mews, great projects and small ideas have been abandoned and propped against the walls of compromise. Mattie Jo's calf pelts are making resident rats happy out by the dumpster. Bick, poor fucking Bickford, swirling slowly down another drain and drawing his knotted notions tight in around himself. It's late in the day for most of Lenny's former clients, but it's going to be a very long day, and there's much to be done. How soon can you have this to us? 2 weeks. Grant accepts a glass of wine from the newly deferential gallery rep. That long? I'd like to send someone around to take a look. Murph has a lot to gain here. 2 weeks, and I'll have it shipped over. Grant lets a small wrinkle ride the bridge of his nose and sets the glass down after one sip. It's a shame he can't lord it over Murphy the way the little prick deserves, but Grant has a deadline. Brendan Murphy's lucky day, and he knows it, though he'll never understand where the luck is rooted. Spring will never come this year. Literally. It's late May, and yesterday a slicing, icing rain cut down the most determined daffodils. Bickford slips on the top step just outside his door, and just like that, makes his deadline. The funeral is not well attended. Everyone's facing down the same end of game, and time has narrowed to a mean, unforgiving bitch with a cleaver in her hand. In her studio, Mattie Jo lifts and sets down a series of brushes and faces her own silent and inexorable mortality. She leans into it to implore a Lenny, an angel, an interceder to make the grand bargain and save her. Grant isn't taking any her calls, though he accepts her presence graciously enough when she goes by. He's busy. They're all busy. Throughout the tribe, a sick energy is pulsing up and down and into a dozen hands attached to 24 eyes and 30 trillion splendidly firing synapses. Only Mattie is out in the cold without a way forward. The Ainsley sisters, of all people, have secured an exhibit down at Janot's, and Mr. Xander has holed up with 6 new blocks of pink granite. There's no joy in all this creating, no sense of accomplishment, no pulling the impossible out of the ether. It's a factory, and here comes another idea down the line to be locked into place with another chugging right on behind it. Mattie watches the workers, focused and grayed and wearing down, jealous as hell. Where is it coming from? She steps back a bit to take in Grant's new piece. What do you mean? Here, have a beer. Grant would like her to drink up and get out. Each hour brings a jolt of doom, and he really has to get back to work. I'm not getting it, you know. You, Xander, the Ainsleys, Mick and Stella Meiosis, and everyone's turned into mad little art robots. All but me. Mattie, once so ferocious and mighty, puddles into the chair like a show cat without a show. Bickford got it all right. Both of them look a little startled at Grant's blurt. What happened that day here? Mattie ignores the beer and leans forward, her lower jaw jutting. Was that really Lenny we heard? I haven't seen him since. Have you? I know as much as you do. Grant tries not to think about that day. When he does, there's this terrible swish of voices that grinds into his brainstem, and he has to get back to work. Mattie Jo leans back and fixes him with a glittery glare. Deep in unused chambers, something is beginning to pump, not smoothly, but with jerks and starts and stops. The golden times of ideas rising languidly to concentric surfaces and rimpling into being never really existed, and Mattie stands abruptly. I gotta go. Outside, she ignores another sleety, foul day and knits all that's loose into her into bunched bundles of barbed intent. The gods won't come to her, so she'll just have to invade Olympus. Rounding the corner to the alley behind her building, she has a bad moment when she thinks the trash may have been collected. But there they are, a stinking, wet pile of calves' pelts, gnawed and gummed together into a parody of a wedding cake. Mattie has moved mountains and art dealers with her more formidable will, but now she launches herself at the pile of pelts, embracing it and wrestling it and screaming it into her back door. The smell of rot sets off a new series of inner pops, and she thinks this must be it. This must be what's driving the others. Half the pile slides out of her arms, and she leaves a trail of dead skin between the alley and her studio. It takes over an hour, but finally she's got the pile back indoors and can catch her breath. Now what? She skirts the pile, kicking a pelt here and there. The urgency is gone, the popping and grinding silent. She's alone with the pelts of 28 dead calves, and suddenly realizes she doesn't have the first notion of what to do with them. Mattie Jo slumps to the floor and stops thinking. Near the edge of the pile, she watches curling maggots wiggle and fall. Each one that falls makes a small ping and melts into a smear of color on the floor. magenta, lime green, aquamarine, fuchsia, and deep purple. A hum rises, and somewhere a strumming, whining, rising, and falling of ancient wailing undergirds the hum. Not sure why, Maddie climbs up onto the slippery pile of skins and begins to poke and dig around. There's a way in, and she will find it. The pounding on her door vibrates up and down her bones and sets off depth charges of fury. She ignores it. Maddie! Mad! Hun, it's me, Chloe. Come on, Mad, I know you're in there. I saw you go in. Pause. I come over to help. God damn that stupid junkie bitch, go the fuck away. Nothing. There is no way in. For just a breath of a moment, something in the pile is going to give way. Again with the pounding. Maddie knows Chloe and knows it's useless to ignore her. Chloe is nature's own version of waterboarding. There is nothing to do but climb down from the now closed portal and answer the damn door. In she comes. Only Chloe can turn the word hi into 4 syllables, each rising until the last which drops and fades away. She peers in that feral Chloe way, always on the lookout for the next bit of change to scoop up, the next morsel of gossip to carry to a place where it can turn a profit. What do you want? Maddie Jo will have Chloe out the door pronto. Got anything to drink? Chloe leans in with that conspiratorial gleam in her shifty beige eyes. Everything is something to manipulate in Chloe's world. A lull is ending. Around the edges of something vast, small maggots of measurable time are pinging and falling. Something stirs. Something draws in fresh fire for breath and shudders into reverse to move in a counterclockwise direction. Grant feels it and picks up his pace. The Ainsleys stop talking, and glued, gutted, and gripping each other's hands rise as one and hit the street. An immense field of influence streaked with blinding, twining, shifting veins of chartreuse, magenta, and blue-black, leached from dying maggots, begin to swing in wide arcs that brush against elegant crystal mouthpieces, knocking them to the burnished floor of the universe where they smash and leave their broken selves across a night sky that no one in the city can see. But Chloe feels it and doubles down. This is her time, and here is her scotch. She smiles the closed-mouthed smile of rotten teeth and unspoken threats. What's that, the new masterwork? Could be. Maddie's giving up nothing. Where's Lenny got to? I'm suddenly getting all these calls to pick up cleaning and walk dogs. Who knows, maybe he finally followed his true love out to L.A. Is the floor tipping? Maddie watches maggots roll and feels queasy. Chloe drains her glass and goes over to circle the pile. Here and there she kicks at it, skirting the squirming maggots. She pulls her lips into a tight-closed smirk and fixes Maddie Jo with a look. To Maddie's ears, there's a definite scraping, sliding thing going on, and the smears of color on the floor are puddling out in every direction. Chloe begins looking from Maddie to the pile and back again. She tenses slightly, teasing. You know what they're saying. She's all eager puppy again. Of course I know I started it. It's time to reestablish who's boss here, and Maddie Jo strides to the pile. Long double helixes of digits are rumbling under the skins, bumping and twisting, scratching against a wall of glass. Across town, Grant drops the bit of color that has been whispering promises and warnings. The center does not hold, and bits of consensus reality begin to split off, smacking into walls and foreheads. Chloe makes a judgment call and steps aside quickly, allowing a flying Maddie Jo full and complete access to places she suddenly decides she doesn't really want to see. A great field of spring green ripples and spreads, carrying a distinctive rush of Lenny to spill over a ragged edge of conjecture. No lungs, nothing to breathe, and yet an echo of Alexander Castor's dominating volume cuts striating furrows into the green, so that it separates into ribbons that float among marching columns of certainty. Deeper than the darkest midnight blue, the source of an ancient hum gains momentum and adds a frothy foam to cushion a theoretical landing into a mountain-high pile of feathers. Here and there in the floating mayhem rises a curious calf's head, turning and turning, bleating silently, and then ducking back down into feathery safety. The full velocity being promised hasn't arrived yet, and up and down the light spectrum, 100 million pumping arteries of intent choke out a Morse code of disaster. Far and down and deep in fractaled folds where sparking facets rub and glint off each other, tiny bubbles grow. Like swarms of individual sperm, each one frantically wiggles toward an unknowable surface with ferocious intent. It takes a lot of shit to grow the prize roses, and what was once an artist with a pile of dead hides has smeared across the plane of 10 universes to fertilize a next rising tide of ideas. Neither the rising ideas nor the sinking remnants of the woman recognize each other, even though she sucked up more than her fair share of the rising cloud during her lifetime. There is no cause and effect, no karma, no just exchange of sentience for miracle. Somewhere a massive drain adds the winding, churning stuff of Lenny, Derek, Castor, and Matty Joe into a thundering whirlpool that sucks hard at the back of 100,000 percolating brainstems in studios, on subway trains, at kitchen sinks, and in post-coital drowsings. Tugging hard, stretching a seeking, grasping, questioning line back and down 100,000 spinal columns, our four miscreants are joined by 10 million other Jesuses who have now given their all for art. Grant experiences it as a blaze, but really it's nothing more than a tiny satisfying pop as the perfect bit of glass settles into the perfect spot in a small hidden fold near the base of his brainstem. He's lost track of time, hungry for each next blaze of perfection, and then each subsequent veering into the next new, unmapped and unmappable territory. His face hurts from grinning hard. The doorbells and telephones go ignored, and another day folds into the night of cackling and creating. And Chloe? She's humming to herself and finishing off the scotch. Those maggots sure are interesting. She finds she can squish them herself with her foot, and they do the same little ping, leaving a shining smear of color on the floor. It's cold in here. She pokes around, being careful to skirt that pile of stinky pelts. She can feel the suck coming from the top and center of the pile. There's change in the sugar bowl that she pockets and makes herself a sandwich. She can probably sleep here tonight. Mr. Xander, though, isn't having nearly as much fun, even with the prolific amount of work he's doing. Each next throbbing seed of idea that squeezes up is crescent-shaped and so scrapes its way to Xander's surface, causing nausea and cold sweats along with a thin, screechy kind of pain. He swallows and reaches for a smaller chisel. The dogs had to go. Even the most adorable among us has a deadline. Some are just a bit more in the care of the untrustworthy than others. The new block stands 8 feet by 6 and is only now showing its true face. In the days since that frightening snowstorm, Mr. Xander has feverishly carved away at 5 of these blocks of granite towering around the room, with deep furrowed twinings of braided beast faces, each devouring another on up to the ceiling. Like zinging strands of razor wire, something is zipping upwards, gathering the edges of the storm in behind it and baring its teeth. A spark throws itself headlong to other synapses up and down the continuum, and the electrical storm blazes from gut to amygdala and straight out the top of 300,000 heads. The migraines come wrapped around a special little something for each head, and 300,000 new songs, stories, paintings, theories, sculptures, and poems appear out of nowhere. Nowhere. Now that's a crazy place, all right. It's pretty much Chloe's home turf, and she hums a meandering aria while piling up those stinky old pelts into the corner. She supposes she could haul them out of here, but she knows a portal when she slips on its excrement, and you just never know when that'll come in handy. Besides, cranky and unpleasant as Matty Joe can be, Chloe would be happy to have her come back. No one keeps really good scotch around anymore. It's May, and there's still a skin of ice on the puddle. Hysteria abounds. The fundamentalists of every stripe are feeling vindicated, shouting each other down, each eager to claim full knowledge of man's imminent downfall. Children have lost interest in their electronic gizmos, and parents have stopped trying to clean the walls. Every surface bears the seed of all those zinging zips of pain. And in the middle of the mayhem, Grant selects another exactly right bit of clear, hard knowledge that keeps its secrets. There used to be a pattern emerging in the mosaic, a recognizable and expanding picture that anyone would enjoy, would want to spend time with. As soon as Grant and his bits of glass realized that, however, the shift shot back down the twining, writhing, pulsing, enjoined synapses to thud into a faraway basement in the bottom of a great gut that is planted squarely over the drain, stopping the whirlpool and defiantly farting false information back up the continuum. Chloe hears it and knows. She's always known, and everyone shuns her accordingly. When she leads in towards her next mark, sounding knowing and clueless at the same time, She knows exactly the effect she's having, and it works every time. Every single time. The scotch is gone and this place is too cold. She showers, helps herself to warm stuff to wear, and does one more round to make sure she's got everything she needs, and heads out into the storm. First, she considers the Ainsleys. They're always a sign it did them. Tinsley's seen it all, so finding Chloe scratching at the window of his basement flat and then coming in to spill mounds of change all over his badly tilted kitchen table is par for the course. He's set. Of course he's set. The more mad the world, the more opportunity for Tinsley. He makes sure he's set, and then he just waits. The world will always come to Tinsley, and he knows this from long experience. What do you think is going on? Chloe knows her sleight of hand shit never works with Tinsley, but it's a reflex that she's stopped trying to control. Pocket change? Really? Come on, girl, give it up. Tinsley's just finished his dinner and is feeling like having a little fun. He's never done any of his product. He seldom even has a glass of wine. But when it comes to putting junkies through their paces, no one gets as high as David Tinsley. They got it coming to him. Chloe scowls and slumps into the old broke-back sofa. She knows the dance and is resigned to it. A sudden chatter rattles across the back of her head, and she jerks forward to see what's on the sofa. Nothing. The chatter continues while Tinsley goes into the kitchen, still talking. Chloe tips her head as if that will improve the reception, but nothing is coming through clearly, just the snittering, jumpy noise of something gathering itself. She must need this fix worse than she thought, and is glad she came to old Tinsley. Obviously, the shit she got yesterday downtown was nasty. Let's see some folding cash, sister. Tinsley sets his magic tin box on the table next to his easy chair and smiles. Fuck you, money's money. Fuck you and get your goddamn laundry money out of here. But he doesn't make a move to put the box away, and the dance is still on. They sit and stare at each other. Chloe is already used to the chatter, like an old-time ticker tape machine running in a line right below her earlobes. Tinsley lights up one of his stubby little cheroots and blows several expert smoke rings to the ceiling. Sleet begins slapping down the windows, and the chatter gets louder. Look, Tin, I'm hurtin', and this is what I got. Chloe has perfected her whine to an instrument of mild torture, but Tinsley's impervious. She knows it, he knows it, and they keep on dancing. Show me some Andrew Jackson. Show me some Andrew Jacksons, and we got something to talk about. Chloe pauses and considers the possibilities here. Without a conscious move in that direction, she gets the sense there's something useful to be done with this mumble in her head. She kind of squeezes it, and the pitch rises. Releasing it, the tempo slows a little, and the pitch deepens. Playing like this, she almost misses what's going on across the room for her in that dim little room. You hear that? Tinsley's looking a little green. Hear what? Now Tinsley's tipping his head like a cocker spaniel, trying to decipher something old and big and scary. He glares at Chloe like he knows she's up to something. Something between a growl and a hum vibrates through the room, rattling the change on the table. Tinsley's not easily fucked with, but this is fucking with him. From a long ways away, something big and bad is moving fast, and there's no way of knowing which way it'll come from. Chloe, on the other hand, is more relaxed than she can remember ever having been when she wasn't high. She scratches her nose and smiles. There's a pulling on all her edges, and she can feel her face widening. So you gonna help me out here? She has to push against it, but does manage to lean forward and shove the spare change in Tinsley's direction. His eyes are bugging a little, but he reaches for his tin box and opens it. Outside, the wind picks up. Chloe settles back on the lumpy old sofa in that sweet relief that comes ahead of her hit. Finally. Has he eaten yet today? Grant can't remember. He pauses, drops a bit of glass, and gets a good whiff of himself. Hasn't showered lately either. On its back in the tray, that bit of glass is popping and humming. Grant misses Lenny. When he tries to stand up, his legs give way, and he plops back down, bewildered and out of breath. He looks toward the kitchen, and then back at his little friend jiggling and hopping around in the tray. Oddly, when he tries to rise and go eat, all the strength in him puddles out to the floor, and he can't move. But when he turns back to the glass, to the work, a wire-thin shaft of power slices back up through his spine, and the juice flows into his arms and head. He keeps feeling stuff going on. There's something hitting in a regular rhythm, with certain things making a bigger thump than others. When he tips this happy little bit of glass into its preordained destination, he can feel a big wallop about to hit and tenses. All the little bits of colored glass get very agitated at this and shudder in harmony for him to settle down, relax, and pick one of us, damn it. Winding into each other, long, stretched out, fraying bits of individual lines of consciousness cling to other bits, biting into any stable frequency and hanging on for dear life. And so at last, Lenny and Derek seem to have found their happily ever after, though how happy they are is not clear. Castor winds in between them, hooking into whatever he can find to hook into, while wriggling away from the frantic notes of what has become of Matty Joe. Mud. It's all become mud. Every brilliant color shoves into the breaking down columns of certainty and logic that were never to be trusted anyway, and all of it rams down what Matty Joe still thinks of as her throat. A ragged series of fish hooks tear away great chunks of certainty, leaving a spectrum of anguish and loss winding down into that farting gut. You think you're safe? Pick up a paintbrush and see what happens. Maybe this time you'll be safe. Maybe this time you'll experience all those pleasant surfacings that rise from an unknown place to slide out the front of your head, out your eyes, down your long muscles, and appear as an aria, a brilliant series of essays, a masterwork. Go ahead. Take your chances. Your turn is coming. Ask Chloe. What happened to her, you ask? Here she comes, or rather, here comes a twisted, disintegrating rope of denial and disbelief that's being shot through with daggers of maggots whose sole purpose was to tease apart the strands of one junkie's driving hunger and turn it all into working fertilizer. All for you. Don't waste it. Bickford, poor stupid drunk, he gorged himself on the stuff and later found he had nothing to contribute. Feel that sad bubble that occasionally rises, that bright idea that makes it halfway into some form and then withers away? You can thank all the Bickfords swirling down into the gut for those false starts, and come on, every time you fight your way through the withering, grab your blessed gift and make it work, you get to look back at your deformed, half-realized babies and exult. But you'll get your turn in the maelstrom too, so make this time count. Suck it up, drink it up, gobble it up, and use every molecule, those that sing gloriously and those that fart obscenely. In the end, all you get to be is more fertilizer for some other bits of creativity that haven't even been dreamt up yet. So gird yourself, fill yourself, pull on every ropey bit of inspiration that arrives in any form and blast it across your cosmos. This is your only chance. Make it count. When summer finally arrived, sometime in late June, rents had gone down and new people arrived. A new tribe of the optimists and the cynics, ready to settle in and change the world. Some really did do exactly that, and others, well, somebody needs to pick up the groceries, walk the dogs, and pine for rejected love. None of which, by the way, will go to waste.